Hello, everybody. Welcome, and thank you for joining us for today's ASA webinar, Mindset Matters: How to Reframe Mindset for Positivity in Caregiving, which is part of the Empowering Professionals in Aging series, presented by Homestead Incorporated, franchisor of the Homestead Network. My name is Julia Burrows with ASA, and we are so glad that you are able to join us today. We will be getting started shortly, but before we do, we have a few housekeeping notes to tend to. If you would like to download and print today's slides, you can find those under the tab labeled Resources. If you would like to apply for continuing education credit, there's information on the tab labeled CE application here. You have 60 days to complete a continuing education application, and it may take up to 30 days from the date of your application for us to issue and process your CE credit. If you are not logged in directly to this webinar, that is if you're watching as part of a group, or if you're not using an individualized confirmation URL, you will not be eligible for CE credit because we have no way of tracking your online attendance. You must register using your own email address and then use that individualized link. If you have any questions during today's presentation, you can send those to us at any time using the questions box, and we will save the last 10 to 15 minutes of today's program to get to those. We have two wonderful speakers with us today. We have April Ibarra, a gerontologist and strategic partnerships manager for Homestead, who's been working in this field for more than 25 years, as well as in healthcare. She is passionate about improving the lives of older adults through advocating, educating, and providing resources to help them live their highest quality and most independent life. Joining April is Dr. Blight, an international speaker and consultant on caregiving, aging, and healthcare. He also works as an adjunct professor of healthcare management and public health at Shenandoah University. He is the founder of Caregiving Kinetics and co-creator of the Caregiver Transformation Retreat. Dr. Blight's passion for supporting caregivers is rooted in his prior work as the owner of a large home care company and as a healthcare policy leader at the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services. He was recently recognized as a top 100 healthcare leader by the International Forum on Advancements in Healthcare. Thank you both for being here today. We're excited to have you.
Oh, thank you so much for. Yes, hello, Aaron.
Hi, April.
So glad you're here.
Me too.
Well, everyone, you are really in for a great treat today, and I know it's a busy time for everyone. So we're glad you're here. Sit back for a really fascinating discussion. I have to say, I am just honored to be here with you, Aaron. I know that we accidentally joined up for this session. I'm stepping in for Lakeland today, but I am super excited. Our topic today, Mindset Matters: How to Reframe the Mindsets for Positivity in Caregiving. Boy, that's a big title, Aaron. Do you think we can do this in an hour?
It's a big title. I hope we can do it, April.
I think we can, and there's nothing more universal than caregiving. And I think it's a term that gets it's so underappreciated because it's just a common thing that we do in life. And I think most people who are in the role of caregiving, whether previously or now, they really neglect the magnitude of what they're doing. And so, Aaron, I can't wait to hear your insights, and we've got a lot, so let's jump in. I found this quote that I thought kicks things off really well. It's not the load that breaks you down, it's the way you carry it. And Lena Horne said that. And so I love this topic, and I can't wait to hear what Aaron says, because I think we need positivity. We need the right mindset to appreciate the magnitude of the role of a caregiver. I think, again, we often jump into the role. We don't even recognize that we are a caregiver. Sometimes it's a rapid transition when there's a change in diagnosis, and sometimes it's a very gradual thing with a spouse or a family member. But caregivers play a vital role in the lives of older loved ones. And I say older loved ones, but I think it's important to recognize because that not, while we do love the people that we're caregiving, sometimes family dynamics are not always rosy. I come from one of those families, but yet we're still caregivers, right? So we say loved ones, but sometimes the relationships are quite dynamic, quite can be challenging, which often makes that role even more difficult. And it takes that mindset to realize what a luxury it is to be able to care and support for someone, whether you have a great relationship or you have a rocky relationship. And, sometimes it's a quick journey, sometimes it's a long journey, but today we're really going to talk with Erin about how we can change that mindset and transform the caregiving experience, because we only get this once in a lifetime with a particular person. So let's jump in here. Let's go through the objectives quickly. We got a lot to cover. We want to understand the impact that caregiving can have on your mental and emotional health. No surprise there. We want to learn how to check some assumptions about caregiving. We also want to uncover methods of reflection, and this is where Erin's really going to give us some insights that can help the caregivers learn about themselves and improve their caregiving experience. And then finally, we want to identify opportunities to improve the caregiving situation. I oftentimes, as a caregiver, we just get in the weeds with the everyday tasks. And it's hard to lift our head up and sometimes really see how poignant it is, how incredible it is, because we're working so darn hard and we're so distracted. So we're going to get into all this. So pay attention. This is going to be very exciting. So what is a caregiver or a care partner? We tend to use the word care partner. I kind of like that. And I can imagine, and I just want to applaud everyone who's here today listening, because I know at one point you have been a caregiver, you support caregivers. So the fact that you're here listening today, we're just very excited. But technically, a caregiver is just a person who provides care and support to another individual. So that could be a spouse. It could be a daughter caring for her father or her mother, or vice versa, grandchildren. We have many, many more younger caregivers today. We've got long-distance caregivers. We got people who are living across the street from their loved ones. There is no one way to describe a caregiver. And then we have care professionals. That's important too. Those are the people who provide care for a living. When we say it takes a village, it really, really does. And statistics will tell you, and I like statistics. Okay, we want to get the big picture, but let's get into the stories. So when you look at $470 billion is the value of unpaid caregiving in the United States. I mean, what do you think about that? I mean, that says to me that the care is being provided by people around the aging adults. We know that there's a whole community of senior services, and I did a presentation a little while back on the continuum of care, and that's great. There are options, but regardless of income, we always seek those closest to us first. So we know that there is a lot of time and energy being spent by those around that aging adult to provide the caregiving. And again, it's that informal caregiving that is carrying us through as things start to change a little bit, and that aging adult is no longer to do the basic things that they used to be able to do. And then we have to consider also those people who are caring for someone with dementia. And we all know the stories. We all probably have lived them ourselves. I lost my family, my mother and father, both to dementia. I'm very familiar with the complexities of that. 16.1 million Americans are caring for people living with dementia. So that is I want to say a big burden, but also a big opportunity depending on how we look at it. So we know that there's an impact on the family caregivers. And so let's kind of look at what some of the surveys are saying, and then we really want to get into how we can do this so much better. So it's no surprise that there's a lot of mental and emotional impact that goes along with caregiving. Why is that? I wish I could talk to you about this. I wish I could hear your responses, but I know that you understand all of these emotions. Guilt for not doing enough, resentment for having to do it, anxiety for how am I going to do it, the chronic stress, the uncertainty, and, you know, I'll admit from my own perspective, anger when you're dealing with a relative that maybe you have some past history with, and you're doing the right thing, but all of these emotions are quite real, and they do impact both the care recipient and the caregiver. So I think using Aaron's tips as we start to get into some of his expertise will really help our caregivers understand how to better manage these emotions, and also taking care of yourself. We say that all the time, and it's so easy to say, well, you got to care for the caregiver. Well, in reality, that's not that easy. But when we're dealing with anxiety and depression and all of the stress that goes through it, it's very important. Very important. Let's also look at the other impacts that caregiving can have, and it can have a physical impact. And I love these slides because they're slowly advancing. So let me get all this information out here for you. And I'm sure you already have this list in your mind. When you're a caregiver, you often have multiple responsibilities, not just that of the caregiver. You're taking care of your own family. Many times we're working. And exhaustion and fatigue can play a big role in our own physical health, causing diminishes in our immune system and a prevalence towards chronic health conditions. So, you know, that's just kind of the bad news, but we're going to get to the good news when we talk about the value of what we can do for someone that we're loving. But we also have to recognize that somehow we have to find a balance. We have to ask for help. We have to do what we can to take care of ourselves, and also recognizing that many caregivers are also aging adults themselves. So it's important that we recognize the actual magnitude of the emotional and physical impact so that we can better manage the experience. All right. Now, sense of purpose. I think this is, let me get back here, very important, because obviously we do this many times because it's just a natural extension of caring for someone that we love or someone in our family. But that sense of purpose for being able to do this, if we can get the right mindset, can really reduce the caregiving stress. It can help us with our health. If we recognize that, boy, we get the opportunity to do this, and maybe it's for a limited time, it really gives us a greater purpose. And sort of being, as I say, like to step up outside of myself and look down as if I'm watching a movie and say, wow, I'm very lucky to be caring for this person. So that's important. That's important, and we'll get into more of that as we go. So let's talk about some assumptions, because we do make so many assumptions about the caregiver. So let's kind of talk about some of these, and I'd love to get Aaron's perspective too. I wanted to go through just some of that research and sort of set things up from some of the surveys on caregivers. But assumptions about caregiving. Caregiving is a choice. Some feel like they don't have a choice. It's like, well, there is no long-term care insurance. Medicare doesn't pay for this, so I'm the natural person. Caregiving is a burden. For some people, at some moments it can be, but not always. Our role is to only give care. That's not necessarily true, because we also receive love and care while we are caregiving. And the list goes on. So it is difficult, because typically there's one person who's always dedicated as the primary caregiver. It just naturally falls out that way. And that person can feel like everything is on their plate. They're responsible. So there's a lot of burdens, a lot of stress. But it doesn't have to be that way, right? Erin, tell me what your response is to this slide when we talk about assumptions for caregiving. I'd love to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, April, thank you. Assumptions, in the previous slide, it said that assumptions are taken for granted beliefs. And in the research, assumptions are things that sometimes we're not even aware of because they're just tacit beliefs that we don't even necessarily think about. And so, the concept of caregiving, either I don't have a choice to be a caregiver or I do have a choice to be a caregiver. You can just have that set in your mind. That's your presumption. That's just the way it is. And sometimes it becomes necessary. And I would suggest that especially in an ongoing, challenging, difficult caregiving situation, it becomes necessary to revisit or to examine some of those assumptions that we have about what we're doing, why we're doing it, and because that's how we can start to look at things differently. And so it really requires some awareness and some deep introspection to be able to check those assumptions. And as humans, we don't even necessarily think about our assumptions. We just say, well, that's just the way the world is.
Exactly.
One of these bullets here is I must be in control. I must always appear calm. And so I think sometimes a lot of us, and I think I'm this way, we need to keep ourselves in check. We get everything is under control. We're good. People ask us how we're doing. We're good. We don't want to, express a lot of emotion, even though inside we might be just boiling over with anxiety or worry or resentment. And you touched a little bit on that, April. You don't always have to be present that way to the world. It's okay to acknowledge that you're struggling. And sometimes that is one of the first things that family caregivers need to get to, is to just say, it's not okay anymore for me. I have to do something about this.
Yeah, I need help. I need help.
Yep.
Yeah. I know my aunt was caregiving for her husband of 35, 40 years, and he had dementia. And she was always so positive, and she would kind of go on for quite a few minutes when I talked to her about the situation, but she'd always wrap it up with, "But I'm okay. Everything's okay." And that was her way of, she needed a moment to vent. She wanted to be heard, but by God, she was going to do it. And she did. Other assumptions about caregiving are, listed here. Circumstances are worse than they seem. And, some days are certainly better or worse than others. And we can have a catastrophic way of looking at it. And that's why I'm so intrigued, Erin, by your work, because it does require that mindset. It does require that adjustment to really manage some of these things. And one that I struggle with is child taking care of the parent. With my background in gerontology, I look at everything through the lens of the aging adult. And so I'm very particular about this one because I feel like even though we are supporting that older adult, if we are the child taking care of our family, it's not our role to be the parent. But tell me what your thoughts are on this slide and that particular topic.
I'm glad you mentioned that, April. I know I've heard some folks say, parenting my parent, and I understand where they're coming from. Personally, I don't quite look at it that way, because that person is your parent, regardless of what today's conditions are. They gave you life, and that parental role will always be there. And that's also probably a significant reason why you are taking on the caregiving responsibilities for that person. And there are some in terms of activities that you may be involved in with your parent in a caregiving situation. That might represent some things that you might do with a child, of course, but that's always your parent.
Yeah.
And you're the adult.
And
I think one other thing
and you're always the child.
You're always the child, and the parent will always look at you as their child, and that really comes to bear in the dynamics of that relationship when caregiving comes into play as well. Sometimes parents are just not inclined, no matter how old the adult child is, they're just not inclined to listen to their child because that's their child. So they're more likely to listen to other people. That's not uncommon.
Yeah, which can be frustrating, right? Can be frustrating for that caregiver because they're like, gee, well, sure, now you listen to your neighbor, but you won't listen to me. I tried to tell you that 100 times. So that's I guess, part of the challenge. You know, other assumptions, that we can talk about are assumptions about death. And I feel very strongly that people just do not do enough planning at all around, first of all, what they want their aging life to look like and how they want to be cared for, but also how they want to die. Any thoughts on that assumption?
You're right. Death is, in our culture, death is a taboo subject. We're not supposed to talk about it. Even when we have terminal conditions, it's like often that's just kind of the unspoken thing. It's the elephant in the room. And you probably, April, are familiar with the book Being Mortal by Dr. Atul Gawande. I love that book and recommend that to people because he really pokes around the assumptions that are made about death in the medical community and also in our culture. And one of his main points is that, we need to acknowledge that death is part of life. all roads ultimately lead to that. And if we actually were more open and honest about it, we probably could do a better job helping people who are in the dying process and families.
Yeah, and I know on this call, many of the listeners feel the same way. So we have a role to educate and just try to bring the conversation up. And this last assumption I think is great too, because decisions are not black and white. I'm currently facilitating a support group for families caring for people with dementia. And this comes up so often. We want to make a decision. We want to solve a problem. We're determined to get that bath, or we're determined to get them out of that same shirt that hasn't been washed in 3 weeks. And sometimes you just have to pick and choose your battles, right? And not everything can be solved. Not everything has a rational explanation or a happy ending for that matter. So I assume that goes along with our mindset, right?
Yeah, it does. And, April, on that note, I think that it's important to know that caregivers live in a constant state of ambiguity. And so that black and white thinking doesn't really fit in a state of ambiguity. There's just so many conflicting circumstances, so many ironies sometimes that come up in the caregiving experience that you have to learn to kind of struggle through it. And it's not always, right or wrong. That when you have absolutist way of thinking, it can make caregiving more challenging for you.
Yeah, and I assume that's why every caregiver who goes into it has such a different, their own personality, their own way of thinking. That that's such a good point. I know I'm very task oriented, and I want to get things done. I want to solve problems, and sometimes that's not possible. So I'm listening closely, Erin. Yeah. So why don't you talk to us a little bit about mindset? Would you mind carrying us through that conversation?
So I really appreciate, by the way, April, that quote that you offered from Lena Horne, I actually incorporated that quote into my book, When Caregiving Calls. It's one of the little quotes before one of the chapters. I love that quote. It's a great reflection of how caregivers maybe can think about the carrying the load of caregiving. But I also love the conversation about assumptions because, and I'm not a medical doctor. I always like to make sure that people understand that I'm not a medical doctor. My doctoral degree is in learning, and I have studied and continue to study caregiving as a learning experience. And so as humans, we talk about these assumptions, and we go around in the world, and assumptions help us to interpret the world around us and help us to understand events, understand our own lived experiences. Our assumptions give us a way of looking at things and responding to things. And caregiving challenges our assumptions. Caregiving can rudely introduce new circumstances into our lives, adversity, changes in relationships, and so suddenly those ways that we presumptively looked at the world and thought about the world no longer fit. We have to start to think a little bit differently to adapt our thinking to the current situation that we're in. And this is where the concept of mindset enters in, April. I think that this webinar came as a result of I think it was a Facebook Live that Lakeland and I did about a year ago.
Yeah.
And we talked about assumptions, and we talked about mindset and reflection. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that today. But as I was preparing for this webinar, I was thinking about the word mindset. And it strikes me that it's actually two words, mind and set. And I thought, well, what's something else that we set? We set a clock, right? And when you set a clock, you're setting it to the present moment. You're adjusting the clock so that it aligns with the present moment. And so if you think about it that way, when we're setting our mind, we are adjusting our mind to align with the present moment. And you said it earlier, April, when you were talking about how caregiving enters into our lives. There are different ways that caregiving appears. I like to call it either the creep or the crisis. The creep happens very slowly, imperceptibly almost. You may not even realize that caregiving is starting to enter into your life, but eventually, one day, suddenly you'll realize, my goodness, I'm doing all of these things for my loved one, and it's different, and I'm like more of a caregiver than I am a family member. In other cases, it might be a crisis where just overnight, because of a diagnosis or because of an injury, suddenly you're thrust into the caregiver role. And this is what happened to me and my family. It was the crisis for us, and it just upended our lives. And so my mother-in-law was diagnosed with a brain tumor. I was 29. My wife was a little bit older. Won't say how much, but her mother moved into our home, and we just became family caregivers. And we struggled for 5.5 years in that role. But so the idea of mindset, setting your mind to align with the present moment, is so important in caregiving. And there's really when you talk about mindsets, there are two different types of mindsets I want to talk about, a fixed mindset or a growth mindset. People with a fixed mindset have a way of looking at the world and interpreting their experiences in the world that is fixed. It's based on past experience, based on learned things, but because they have a fixed mindset, they're very closed-minded. They tend to interpret events of their lives consistent with past practice. They tend to be more resistant to change. They tend to be more inflexible in their way of interpreting things, than their way of being and responding to the circumstances of their lives, because they're always looking through the paradigm that they previously established. A growth mindset is different. A growth mindset allows you to interpret the experiences of your life in new ways. People with a growth mindset tend to be more open, they are more willing to change, and they're more adaptive in response to the current circumstances of their lives. Now, if you're a caregiver, the better mindset to assume is a growth mindset. Because as your loved one's needs are evolving and changing, the circumstances of your life are changing, the things that you're doing are changing. And so if you can adopt a growth mindset and start to look at this as an opportunity to change, a need to adapt, a willingness to learn and to grow and to develop, you're going to be more successful in the caregiver role. Any thoughts about that, April?
Yeah, I'm just sitting here thinking it doesn't matter if you're a caregiver or you're not in a caregiver role. This is important for all of us. But I think especially, yeah, it is, especially now. I mean, I've been traveling quite a bit. I've been going to some conferences. It gives me a chance to sort of think and really hear perspectives from other people in aging so yeah, I think we all have to it's going to make life easier if we can all be in that growth mindset. And, some people think, I don't have time for this. I'm in the middle. It's a crisis. But I think it makes our life easier when we can just be adaptive to the circumstances.
Yep. I mean, the research shows that people who have a growth mindset, they're happier, they're more resilient, they're more successful in overcoming their challenges. Yeah.
Yeah, I find when I'm resisting something, like I don't want to do it or I don't want to be here, then it just is harder. But when I just go with the flow and accept it, like, okay, I'm here right now, I'm present with I'm currently caregiving for my aunt. I'm going to give her my full attention and I'm going to get something back. I always do when I allow myself to be there.
Yeah, that was awesome.
Yeah.
So here's something that I always like to tell caregivers. You were not innately endowed with the ability to care for your loved one. And sometimes family caregivers are really, really hard on themselves. And I want you to understand that the condition of your loved one, it's emergent. It's not something that you were formally trained for. You don't have any unless you're like a skilled medical professional, you don't have medical background to meet their unique needs. And even skilled medical professionals, I'm going to tell you, April, they find caregiving very challenging as well. They might be super good at certain technical medical requirements, but not so good at some of the other help with activities of daily living and just the day-to-day care requirements, the emotional
and personality.
And the personality.
Yeah.
So it's caregivers that think, oh, I have to be perfect. I have to do this, exactly right, or I'm failing if I'm not doing it perfectly. Please don't take that way of thinking. Don't adopt that mindset. Understand going in that you just don't have this innate ability. But here's the great thing. And this is the great thing about being a caregiver. You can grow into the role through a process of learning and development. So no matter where you start as a family caregiver, there's a reason why you're there. There's a reason why you have been tasked with providing care to your loved one at this time. And because of that reason, that should hopefully motivate you and help you to realize, yes, you have something to offer and you can grow and you can do this. So when we're talking about learning, I just want to step back for a minute and talk a little bit about the research in learning. And we're going to apply this, of course, to caregiving. But oftentimes when we think about learning, we just think about learning as a product. Right? And school, I think, maybe trains us this way because we go to school we study, we attend class, we take exams, and then we graduate. And the product is our diploma, our certificate, and we say, okay, here is my product, and we convert that into a commodity in the workforce, right? And so learning is definitely can be viewed as a product, but learning is also a process. It's the way it's not only what we know, but it's also how we come to know things. And so there's a couple of big words, ontology and epistemology. That's what we know and how we know it. And so that's important as adults to realize, well, how do we learn? Once we've graduated, once we're out of the school and those ideas of getting a product of a diploma or whatever, how do we continue to grow and learn? And learning can also be informative, and it can also be transformative. And the way that I like to think about this, April, is informative learning is, if you think about the form of something, I'm going to say this is a little bit abstract, and I'm going to try to use a more concrete example. But if you think about the form of something, it has a certain shape. And informative learning takes new information and knowledge and puts it into the existing shape. It goes inside the existing form. But transformative learning, with transformative learning, the shape or the form itself will change. So the way that you actually see the issue is different. And as I was thinking about this, I thought of this camp that I went to for youth a couple months ago in the summer. And they did aluminum casting there. And what they did was they took soda cans, and you have an aluminum soda can, and you look at that and you're like, well, what do you do with that? Well, you put soda in it, right? And you could put all the different varieties of cola or lemon lime or whatever. All these different sodas can go in there. And that's informative of all the different ingredients and the different flavors, etc. But the can itself that's just a can. Well, what these young people did at the conference is they put these aluminum cans into this little foundry, and the aluminum melted down, and then through a casting process, the aluminum was shaped into something completely different. It looked like a little, it was an emblem that they were creating to remember the camp. So the aluminum can suddenly took on an entirely different shape, and their understanding of what could be done with aluminum was expanded. And so that's kind of what transformative learning is. And I really, in April, I look at caregiving as a transformative learning experience because it changes the way that we look at the world. It changes the way that we look at our loved ones. It changes the way that we look at life. It changes our values. It changes our assumptions. It changes our attitudes. Our relationships with other people outside of the care relationship can be changed as well.
Yeah.
We also know that reflection, intentional reflection, the slide says reflection. That's a typo. Mea culpa. Reflection is a So reflection involves critically assessing the content, process, or premise of our efforts. And so when we think about this, the content is really, so first of all, it's critical assessment. We look back critically at what we are currently doing. And the content is what we're doing. The process is maybe how we're doing it. And the premise is why we're doing it. So when we are intentionally reflecting, critically reflecting, we're going back and asking ourselves, what are we doing today? How are we doing it? And why are we doing it? And if we have a fixed mindset, we may find that, those old reasons, or the old ways of doing things, they don't match. They're not aligned with the present circumstances, the reality that we're in with our loved ones. So I need to change. So by examining different ideas, actions, or assumptions, we might be able to identify alternate ways of doing things, alternate ways of thinking, ways that will be more responsive to the current circumstances of your life as a caregiver. And that will help you in the long trajectory of caregiving. And you said this before, April. Some caregivers, it's so easy to be like a hamster on a spinning wheel. You just become so wrapped up in the to-do list, in the tasks of caregiving, that you fail to reflect on what you're doing. And by reflection, you'll be able to do better and be more successful in the role.
Absolutely. I think it's, I do it right then and there. I thought about my own aunt that I'm caregiving for now. She's got a son who lives close by, but everybody approaches things differently, right? He makes sure things get done, but not necessarily giving sort of the level of connection that she needs, right? So I would go to see her and recognize that, we all try to do things. Let's make sure you got groceries. What do you want to eat? And, we feeling like we're doing the best we can. But yet I didn't want to take the time to sit and have that meal with her, right? I brought her what she wanted, and I wanted to drop it off because I needed to go. I live an hour away. And I thought, that's not really what she needs. She needs me to sit and enjoy that meal. Would it kill me to take 20 more minutes to sit with her? And I recognized that because she wasn't eating. And it wasn't, she blamed it on her taste buds and blamed it on everything else. But quite frankly, I think she was lonely. She didn't want to eat alone.
Yeah. That's so important. And, April, I think one of the things that you just touched on is the difference between doing and being as a caregiver.
Yeah.
And if you look at care, and this is mindset, this is assumptions, but if caregiving is all about doing, it's only about doing, then yes, you might be really good at delivering on the tasks of care. You might make sure that your loved one's needs are physically being met. You might be running yourself ragged because of all the focus on doing. But if you change that way of thinking to one of being, that caregiving is about being, not only about doing. Now, the focus of your efforts might be a little bit different. It might be more on that relationship, on presence. Time might be viewed differently. You may not be in quite the same rush to get everything on that priority on that task list done. And some things, when you're faced with challenges and you can't do everything, then you just focus on the things that matter most. And so often,
who do they matter to, right? Because I think sometimes for the caregiver, something is more important. I need to make sure you get a shower today. That one comes up quite a bit with caregivers.
Yeah.
But for the older adult, it's just like, can you just sit and have a chat with me, or can you maybe watch this program with me? So I think that list could maybe get smaller if we were really focused more on what's important. Yeah, so true.
So let's talk a little bit about some examples of how reflections can affect our way of thinking, and be reflected in the assumptions that we make. This idea of saying, "Oh, my loved one is well, my loved one is not well, my loved one is not well, and it is affecting me." You can see here how, as we and all three of these remaining slides here, as we go down the list, you're going to see how the reflection itself can lead you to action and to change. So when someone starts to say, "Well, my loved one's not well, it's affecting me, and I am feeling deep emotions such as fear, anger, or grief," you might have, excuse me, I'm sorry. You might have to just admitting that to yourself can be difficult to say. I'm afraid. I'm afraid of what's going to happen to my loved one. I'm afraid that's what's going to happen to our relationship. I'm afraid of what's going to happen to my life, or anger, or grief. You mentioned guilt. Guilt is one of the G words in caregiving. Yeah. How I used to think about my loved one or my life does not apply today. you have to step back to be able to consciously consider these types of things. We talked about the idea of the roles changing, and maybe a parent-child relationship. Suddenly you're starting to realize that my role, who I am in this relationship, is evolving. It's different. And I think one of the important aspects, April, of transformative learning is a discontent with the current situation. And so this is an important kind of pivotal thing where you say to yourself, you know what, the way that this is evolving, it's not working. I have to change something. And so what does that change? It could be that you need to get help for yourself. It could be the way that care is delivered. You might need to outsource care to another party to get formal care providers in there. You may want to change the way that you're structuring your schedule. There's all kinds of different things where you're saying, this is not working, I need to make a change. And so from that point, there's a process of exploring new options and a recognition
it's
that
okay to reset, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And this gets back to that growth mindset, right? Being willing to align your mind and your actions to the reality of the present moment.
Yeah.
And then you take it from there, and now you're planning a different course of caregiving action. You might learn and develop new knowledge and skills. You know what I learned the other day, April? I didn't know this. I just learned this last week. But for occupational therapists, getting a person that has mobility limitations in and out of a car is like one of the most complex things to do in occupational therapy because of all the variance in car seats and heights and the conditions of people. And so and that's like the first thing that a family caregiver has to do upon discharge from the hospital or the rehab center.
With no training at all.
Like the most complicated OT movement that's out there, and you got to do it with no training whatsoever. So that's just an example of something where a skill of getting your loved one in and out of the car. You probably never even thought of that as a skill, but it is a skill, and it's something that you can learn over time. So you try out these different care-related approaches, and as you get better, you reflect on what you did right and what you did wrong and how you can improve, and then your competence grows as well as your self-confidence, and you start to become more comfortable in that caregiver role. And eventually, caregiving can become integrated into your life. So this is how that growth mindset can help you, and how reflection can help you to get to a better place in your caregiving experience. If you're the hamster on the wheel, you are going to burn out. But if you adopt this growth mindset, it's going to be hard, but you're going to be able to improve. The last thing I think is so important to recognize that caregivers need help, and there are lots of different folks who can help caregivers. This is a list of some of those. And I'm wondering, April, anything on this list that really jumps out at you?
Yeah. Gosh. I think support groups. I think I've been facilitating them recently, and I have personally gained so much from the feedback and the experience and the ability to be open and honest about really what everyone is experiencing. So I think support groups are great. And I think care managers. I actually just came back from Aging Life Care Association conference. Those are geriatric care managers. The level of detail and, how do I even say this? They really help with the complex situations, right? Because I think in my mind, we think about caregiving and, oh, mom is a sweet little lady, or dad is just sitting in his chair. And, we know that human beings are not like that, right? It's very, very complex in this world today. And sometimes it's just more complicated than even a family member can handle. So I think leaning in when necessary to expertise, especially when it's more complicated, and support groups for yourself. But everyone wants to help, and sometimes we just automatically say no because sometimes it's easier that way. But again, think about the hamster on the wheel. You're not going to make it, and it's really not fair to the aging loved one not to access other resources. They need other interactions and other perspectives as well.
I agree. Very well said, April.
Yeah. And I think one note just about extended family. I mean, I always go to the worst because I come from a crazy family, and I'm sure I'm not the only one. It's just not always that pretty, and there's always one that, is jealous of the other, and one that wants to control the money while the other one, so do what you can with what you've got, but don't ignore that everyone can have a role. Whereas somebody might be more of the direct care provider, somebody else might be good at scheduling appointments, somebody else might be good at some of the tasks. Create that village. It's going to not only help you as a caregiver, but it's also going to help that care recipient.
Yeah. Thank you, April. So here is some resources that where you want to find out a little bit more. My book is called When Caregiving Calls, Guidance as you Care for a Parent, Spouse, or Aging Relative. Of course, Home Instead, and I just want to give a shout out. You and I met through Home Instead, April, and I was a part of Home Instead Network for many years, and I love that Home Instead and the American Society on Aging have partnered for this webinar, and I just appreciate being invited to be a part of it.
It was just fantastic. I've got a different viewpoint now. Like I said, I always come at it from the aging adult, and I'm looking at it now a little bit more broadly. So I'm looking forward to digging in. I'm looking forward to getting your book as well. And resources. I mean, I think traditionally the family starts to pull and bridge together whatever we can, but there's a point when you need more. Home care can be an incredible resource, and then start tapping into all of your local area agencies on aging and all of your resources. Ask other people. You become a big consumer, and as you said, an expert. When you start to look around you, it's like when you want to buy a car and all of a sudden all you see is, the type of car you want. When you become a caregiver, all you see is other people caregiving, and you're like, hey, where'd you get that? And how do you handle this? And I think it's just a great resource. So, well, thank you, Erin. I so appreciate your expertise and your viewpoint with your background in education. I think is fascinating because I do believe the medical community only looks at things in sort of a linear fashion, right? They're there to do what they can, which is to heal and fix. It doesn't necessarily always work for the aging adult and the family. We need to pull at those other resources and look at things differently. So thank you. So we want to answer some questions. I'm looking here at the list and I don't see a ton of questions. Let me see here. Okay. Let me see. Will you please bring up the slide of the quote about assumptions? Erin, while I'm looking at that, do you want to, let's see, bring up the slide quote about assumptions. Let me see if I can go back real quick.
While you're looking at that, there was a question on just pointing out Albert Ellis, rational emotive behavior therapy, and saying that some of what was described was consistent with this. And I'm not familiar with Albert Ellis, rational emotive behavior therapy. So I looked it up. It says that REBT therapists strive to help their clients develop 3 types of acceptance: unconditional self-acceptance, unconditional other acceptance, and unconditional life acceptance. I love that. I do think that acceptance of the reality of the situation is super important in a caregiving relationship. Thank you for that question.
Yeah. So Sarah asked for that slide, so I put that up there. I'm not sure if that answers your questions, but I think you wanted to see that. Somebody said, what is the career path that leads someone to be a care manager? I would encourage you to go to Aging Life Care Association, ALCA, and they can answer that question for you. I know I'm not a practicing care manager, but I am a care manager. My background is gerontology, but they do have different ways that you can come into that field, and it's fascinating how much they help. That's some good feedback. Let's see here. Okay, I think we maybe got everything. You know, Erin, I think one final question I would ask is, I look at those people who are in the trenches, who are also, working full time, who are caregiving, who have their own families. You know, what's the best advice you can give someone who is in the trenches, who is really so overwhelmed with all of their responsibilities? How do they get into that mindset? How can they really just take a moment to transition? That's a big question, but we talked about a lot of really interesting things, but what do you think is the best advice you could give someone who's in the trenches to help them change their mindset?
I think that accessing some of these supports, for example, I'm a big proponent of counseling because, working with a licensed mental health professional can really help you to change your mindset, or to adapt your mindset, to learn how you can cope with the challenges that are before you. And I know some people maybe have not had experience working with licensed mental health professionals, maybe pastoral counselors, but this would be a perfectly appropriate time to engage one of those folks, because they can really help you reframe your way of thinking to become more successful in meeting the challenges of your life.
There's so many ways, but I think initially it's just taking a minute, even if you just, quite simply take a deep breath and say, how can I change the way I'm looking at this? Not everybody
Absolutely.
has the luxury of, digging too deep or, therapy, but maybe they do, but don't assume anything, right? And ask for help. And boy, we're just so glad to be here with all of you. I hope that this was helpful. I hope that you'll share what you've learned with the people that you're caring for. We'd love to hear from you. I think Erin and I, both of our information is in the deck that you'll download, and we appreciate your time. And I think we're out of time. Erin, thank you so much.
Thank you, April. It's been a pleasure, and thank you all for joining us. I really appreciate this conversation. And thank you, Julie.
Yes, and on behalf of ASA, we want to thank our audience for joining us today. As a few reminders, you will receive a follow-up email after today's presentation that will have a link to the slides that you can download and keep for your reference. That email will also contain the link for the CE application. That is also how you can collect a certificate of attendance if that is what you need. We hope you will join us again for another webinar. All of our webinars are listed on the asaging.org website. We welcome anyone to participate at no cost, and we really appreciate your feedback that you provide in that survey. It helps us to make sure that we're providing the best content possible. Again, thank you to April and Dr. Blight. We really appreciate your time and your expertise. This was such a wonderful conversation to listen in on, and I think a lot of people really gained a lot of good, positive feelings about caregiving, a topic that can be really heavy a lot of the time. So thank you all again, and we hope to have you join us soon. Take care.
Yeah, have a great day, everybody.
Bye-bye.